Yes. So now I can say good morning and good day to those of you in other time zones. And one of the functions of Buddhist meditation, kind of meditation that we teach, is to heal the divides that are within us. That one of the aims is to create a sense of wholeness where all our parts are in harmony. There's the unification is usually the word for this, to unify all the disparate parts of ourselves so that everything works together for the same purpose, for the same intention, kind of organized to be in harmony or be cooperating. And that's, of course, not always so easy. Some people have major civil war going on inside of them between parts they don't like and parts that are rebelling and and they're embarrassed of, and all kinds of things. And they can be quite small. It can be as small as something is happening that we prefer wasn't happening within us, certain thoughts and feelings, and even just some slight sense of preferring it wasn't there creates a little divide. And so the idea is to open up the awareness to find a way to harmonize or unify or have the whole system somehow work together. And one of the ways to do that is actually to lower or dissolve the sense of conflict, the sense of walls, the sense of opposition. And the image I have for this is two people who are opposed and sitting in chairs facing each other end up kind of turning around and being together, have their chairs both facing the same direction, being side by side. Or maybe two people walking, holding each other's hands, walking together someplace as opposed to standing in opposition. So this idea of all the different parts of ourselves feeling that even though they might be different from each other and have challenges, that they find a way that they can work together for the purpose of settling and being at peace. So to begin, to sit upright in a posture for meditation. And that's either literally so or metaphorically so for those of you who might have to lay down. And to take a few, then close your eyes and take a few long, slow, deep breaths with the idea that the deep inhale is stretching the rib cage, the torso outwards to be inclusive, to touch all the different parts of ourselves. And the deep exhale, kind of long, gentle, full exhale, is a settling in, settling everything together here. And then to let your breathing return to normal. And to relax. Generally, if there are divisions or conflicts within, if they're strong, they tend to be manifested in tension in the body. So this relaxing is a way of healing some of that. So relaxing, softening the shoulders. Softening the belly. Softening the muscles of the face. And then gently turning your attention to the breathing. And perhaps with a tender or gentle attention to breathing. And here is where the healing of the vision can begin. If the mind wanders off in thought, no need to feel bad about that or to be aversive to that. That's what the mind does. The idea is to begin again with your breathing without a sense of conflict with your thinking, without aversion. It's almost like gently saying thank you, but not now. And then simply beginning again with the breathing. Or if thinking is strong, breathe with the thinking. Breathe through it. So you're not in its grip. You're not being swept away by it. But you're also not in opposition to it. You know it's there, but you're grounded in the breathing. if in meditation we can become established in awareness instead of being established in conflict or hostility towards ourselves. If we can bring attention, healing awareness to division, conflict, hostility within ourselves, and stay close to the attention, to the awareness, it'll make space for healing to happen, for something to happen which is unimaginable from the perspective of the conflict. And if we can learn that in meditation, then perhaps we can bring that to the world. We can bring awareness, ability to listen, attention, and non-hostility in ways that might heal some of the social divides that exist. At least it can heal how we contribute to those divides. May it be that the practice we do here in searching for the happiness and welfare and peace of all beings uses the practice of mindfulness, awareness, to stay present with awareness, to find the way of mutual peace, to find the way of mutual respect and care. May it be that this meditation today, as we leave meditation, promotes the healing of the painful divides of our society. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. So again, good morning, and here Sunday morning at IMC in California, and good day to those of you who are in other places and around the globe. What I'd like to talk about today is maybe a little bit experimental. It's more of a continuation of reflections that I've been having, and maybe it's a way of continuing to think out loud around this. And that is that we all know that there's a tremendous amount of social division and discord that exists in our society, around the world, but especially here in the United States, especially now with the election season in full swing. And for some of us, it's more animosity and tension than in society, and hostility than it's been for over 40 years. And during the Vietnam War time and right afterwards, that time was pretty bad here in this country. So here it's going to go through cycles of this. And one of the questions, then, this is what the reflection is what's the role of a Buddhist center or a Buddhist practice or Buddhist teachers in this kind of times of social discord and conflict, and one of the principles that has characterized much of the insight meditation movement from the time it started, and also part of IMC, is to attempt to some degree to be politically neutral so that all political persuasions feel comfortable here to practice, with the idea that meditation practice is very profound and significant, and it transforms people into better citizens and better able to live in society in peaceful ways, harmonious ways, generous ways. And so, it benefits people who are suffering. And so we want that benefit to be available to people freely, to all people, anybody, any kind of, everyone to feel welcome to come here and practice. And so, so we've made some decisions about staying relatively neutral, and it can be argued that maybe we went too far, perhaps. But remember, for example, during the Iraq War in 2002, I guess it began 2001, 2002, that someone put a sign up on the window at IMC saying "No war in Iraq," and so it was taken down because there are people who come who, there was a divided country back then. There were people who believed it was appropriate to go to war, and we wanted everyone to come who wanted to practice and not feel like they were challenged to come because they were, their persuasion was not appreciated. And certainly in the Insight Meditation movement, I've talked to a number of people who have been Republicans in this predominantly liberal scene, the Insight scene, but they feel like it's very challenging for them to come and practice here, because if they tell people what their persuasion is, there's sometimes quite a hostility towards them. So they just stay quiet about that. So how neutral should we be? And how neutral are we? Should we be politically, with political positions, political social action, and things like that? Is an open question. And a friend of mine who's a Buddhist teacher wanted to make a line between being involved in politics, political issues, as a Buddhist teacher, versus being involved in issues of civil rights, or human rights, or social justice. That for him there was a line between them where civil rights, social justice, he sees a little bit more as outside the realm of politics, and so that's okay to be involved there and take a position there. And that's an interesting point of view, and so I'm trying to find my way with this also. Where's the line? Where is it too political for us? We shouldn't be that political, and what is being too neutral? And where is that line? And where do we stand up and are involved in things? And it's maybe once Buddhism is in this country for a lot longer, it'll be just like in Christianity. There'll be Buddhist centers that are identified really clearly and overtly with liberal positions, and ones that are overtly recognized with maybe conservative orientations. And there's a little bit of that's happening, but so where are we in IMC, and where do we fit with this? So that's kind of the background for my reflections and what I've been thinking about lately. And so I went into the ancient texts, the suttas, to see what we could read about there, and might help understand Buddha's perspective on these things. And so this talk is titled "The Buddha as an Activist." And it was clear. So if the Buddha, if an activist is someone who promotes social reform of some kind or other, then the Buddha was an activist, because he was explicitly trying to affect the whole world, to benefit the whole world. He advocated for the welfare, happiness, and well-being of the whole world. But more importantly, in terms of being an activist, I think, he encouraged his followers, his disciples, to also go out and work for the welfare of many people, for the welfare of the whole world. So this idea that it's not a simply sit in meditation and don't do anything, and go into the forest and be a hermit, but there was an explicit instructions to go out and benefit the world, and in some ways, the highest benefit from a traditional Buddhist point of view is to teach a path of liberation. But is it limited to that? So it's not involved in politics or not involved in social issues of the time. So we have to remember the Buddha lived a long time ago. He lived in the Bronze Age. And when I'm reminded he lived in the Bronze Age, I think that, I think, wow, that's such a different time than where we are today. And it was a pre-literate culture, and it was mostly an agrarian society. They think around the time of the Buddha, there was just the beginning of urban centers where there was merchants and craftspeople who were doing their trade. And so it was a society where there were no newspapers, there was no Facebook, there was no mass communication, and most people's relationships were with people they had face-to-face contact with. And it was there that the Buddha addressed issues. He couldn't really address elections. There were no elections in most of the countries he lived in. He couldn't, advocate for legislation and new laws, because laws were just the whim of the king. And if you somehow crossed the king, could easily have been lethal to make the king angry. And there's no real economic systems, institutions to change, to advocate for different economic theories for how society should be organized. It was very rudimentary, and there was no institutions to approach except, again, the king. And so there was very little, where activism works in the modern world, there wasn't those channels, there wasn't those places to go and try to make change in our society. But instead of legislative, political, economic activism, the Buddha focused on changing how people treated each other. So I think of it as kind of an activism in ethics, ethical activism. And this he put a tremendous amount of effort into. He frequently advocated for people not to harm each other. In fact, this idea of not harming each other is really at the over and over again at the heart of what the Buddha was trying to teach. That the path of practice, meditation, is really a practice of not harming ourselves, but in learning to do that, also coming to a place of not harming the world around us. A person who became noble, a noble person, one of the titles for someone who's some degree of enlightenment, is described as someone who would not harm anyone at all. So this idea of living a harmless life is very important for him. But what made his efforts to do this a form of activism, in my kind of understanding, is that he didn't just do it for himself. He didn't himself go out and advocate for people to live ethical, harm-free lives. He strongly advocated that his followers do that as well. That his followers go out and prompt ethical behavior, support and encourage that for our society. So in that sense, he was trying to do more than just give teachings to the people he was directly encountering. He was trying to have a wider influence on society of his time. And that is where the Buddha was an activist. So one way of seeing this is where a teaching where this is explicit is the Buddha taught often that people should avoid the 10 unskillful or unwholesome, unethical actions. Instead, they should do the 10 skillful, ethical, wholesome actions. And so he has one set of teachings where he says that the 10 unethical behaviors, I'll tell you what they are in a minute, that they are they're harmful. But what's worse than harmful is what he's going to explain. And then he says abstaining from these unethical behaviors is beautiful. And the word kalyana overlaps with the word ethical, but it literally means beautiful. So it's kind of it has a different flavor than just saying immoral or unethical. They're beautiful. So abstaining from these 10 unhealthy actions is beautiful. And then he says, and then there's something that's more than beautiful. So then he gives the teachings. So he says the 10 unskillful, unethical actions are killing, taking what is not given, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, speaking divisive speech, harsh speech, frivolous or pointless chatter, having ill will, being covetous, and having something called wrong view, wrong understanding. So those 10. But what's worse than those doing those things, killing, stealing, so forth, what's worst is to encourage others to do so as well. Now what's beautiful is to abstain from all of those. What's better than beautiful, more beautiful, transcends beauty, is to encourage others. Oh, actually, the word is not encourage. The word literally is more like to prompt others to abstain from these unethical behaviors. And it doesn't take a lot of reflection to think about that what we have happening in our society in political, social levels is the expression of a tremendous amount of some version of the 10, some aspects of some of these 10 unskillful actions. And but what's interesting here, I find very interesting, he says we should prompt others to live ethically. He doesn't, not in instructions to oppose others in terms of their ethics, oppose those who are unethical, but rather motivate them to be ethical. Now that is a challenging thing to do. Sometimes it can seem a lot easier to oppose people, and if oppose people we can defeat them, oppose people we can stop them, oppose people we can, But the danger with opposition is that people, even if people do stop, they might be angry. They might be more upset. And it becomes building up pressure of an angry society if it's just a matter of winning and losing. And so is there another option? And and maybe that other option of that is much more difficult to figure out a way that's not oppositional. However, it might have longer benefits in the long term to avoid having winners and losers. Now, one of the places you see the Buddha emphasize this non-oppositional approach to how he sees his activism, is what he was trying to promote, is that one of the 10 unskillful actions is divisive speech. And he says that when people are engaged in divisive speech, there are such people who try to create division and perpetuate the divisions that are already there. And they love factionalism. Their expression is they love factionalism, they delight in factionalism, they enjoy factionalism, and they speak to create factions. Partisan positions, real separations, and us versus them. However, for those people who abstain from divisive speech, what the speech they engage in is they do speech that unites those who are divided, and supports those who are already united. So they unite those who are divided, support those who are already united, and speak in such ways as to create harmony. So that was his instruction. So really, to find a way to avoid division. And if that becomes at the heart of this activism, it creates a particular flavor not only to what's being taught, but also how it's being done. Because you can't really create opposition and divide if what you're trying to do is to create harmony. But if we're trying to get people to stop killing and stealing and or institutions or governments to stop all these unethical behaviors, politicians to stop involved in violence and taking what's not given and sexual misconduct and lying and divisive speech, harsh speech, pointless speech, ill will, covetousness. If you try to avoid all these things, how do we do that in ways that avoid creating opposition? The Buddha, when he was talking to his monastics, he said to the monks and nuns that they should act for the welfare of many people, for the happiness of many people, for the benefit, welfare, and happiness of many people. So it's kind of repetitive, but it's really making this point to really go help people, work for their benefit. And they should do that in 3 ways. They should prompt others in physical acts of concord. They should prompt others in verbal acts of concord, and they should prompt others in mental acts of concord to create unity, concord, community. So here we see this emphasis again on concord. So that's what he said to monastics. Maybe for kings, it's a little bit hard in the ancient world maybe to advocate with kings to change their ways. If the slightest whim, the kings could, kill a person back then, and they did. But what the Buddha did was he told stories. He was a great storyteller, and some of them, these stories, might be considered myths in our kind of modern kind of understanding. And he told a myth about an ancient kings, and how kings lived. And he said that if there's poverty, if people are poor, the king should provide them with means, with support. And then if they don't do that, and the myth is a story of a king who didn't do this, then poverty will spread. And if poverty spread, people will steal just to be able to eat and have food. And if then the king uses violence to punish people, this will only spread violence through the kingdom as well. And then more and more, the violence, more and more factionalism, more and more conflict, and the conflict spreads not only between all the different parties in society, but also within families, and things can get pretty ugly. So he uses myth to make this story, and when I first read about these Buddhist myths, I kind of didn't think too much about them. But when I think that back in an oral culture, before there was literature and all these different things, that it was through speech that was memorable that ideas spread through society. And these stories, like myth-like stories, they kind of function like the Facebook in the ancient world. And if you had a good story, people would tell it and retell it. And if that story was one that promoted ethics, care for other people, avoiding divisions, avoiding factionalism, avoiding violence, that was one way maybe to change minds in a kind of a little bit of roundabout way, or rather than coming up to the king and protesting directly. Now, one of the interesting things I see in this ancient teaching is that in being an activist, in speaking up and trying to encourage people to be ethical, it's the activist does not sacrifice their own ethical or wholesome behavior in working to end unethical behavior in others. In other words, you can't be unethical to promote ethics. And so we see that a little bit in some of the Buddha's instructions around some of the 10 skillful or ethical behaviors that he promoted. This includes that one should never be hostile, even privately in one's own thoughts. But instead, one would wish to be others to be free from animosity, oppression, anxiety, and for them to live at ease. So one would really come from a place of goodwill in doing what we're doing. This is kind of a high standard that the Buddha has about any kind of behavior in relationship to other people, to not have hostility. And to speak in words. So instead of speaking frivolous talk, the Buddha said one should speak at the right time and do so with words which are treasured, reasoned, defined, and beneficial. In terms of not killing, the Buddha said that one shouldn't kill, but he added to that, the positive side of that, was he said we should encourage or prompt other people to put down their weapons. So not just get them to stop to kill, but to put down the weapons. Back then in the Bronze Age, that was swords and spears and arrows and things like that. In addition, in abstaining from killing, one should also be gentle and kind and caring for the welfare of all living beings. So we find a kind of a trend or a kind of a flavor in the Buddha's ethical teaching. He encouraged people to be ethical. He encouraged people to support, encourage, prompt others to be ethical. A difficult task, very difficult. How do you change people so they want to, so they're motivated to be ethical? That's the goal. And I don't have an easy answer to that. But what a great goal that is. And so to be unethical or be oppositional to people doesn't really work. So what works? What makes a difference for people? I wonder if stories make a difference. The Buddha told myths that people have evoked people's imagination, evoked people's story mind, which often goes deeper into people's imagination, into the hearts, than just protesting. And this, so the Buddha's idea, as challenging as all this is, the Buddha's approach to what I'm calling activism is rooted in one of the main principles, main purposes of the whole teaching, and that is, in addition to not harming, in order to not to harm, is to be free from greed, hatred, and delusion. The Buddha emphasized we should constantly be working to uproot greed, hate, and delusion within us. And if we uproot greed, hate, and delusion within us, then the way we act in the world would also be, act, speak, and think in the world would also be free from greed, hate, and delusion. And so this is such an important part of Buddhist practice, to become free of greed, hate, and delusion, that if we want to be activists, if we want to make a change in our society and politics and economics, I think it becomes sooner or later, it becomes quite a natural thing or quite a devoted thing for Buddhist practitioners to do it free of greed, hatred, and delusion. Because that's what they're working to cleanse themselves from, free themselves from. They want it to be liberated from. But not a retired liberation, but then to bring that non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion to step into the world and make a difference. So how does all this then translate to the modern world, to us here, IMC or around this country? And I'm a little bit self-conscious in talking about this because it seems simplistic, it seems like it's too idealistic, too challenging to make the real difference that many of us would hope to see. And there's all kinds of arguments being made why this kind of more nonviolent effort can't work. And so we have to do some version of violence or some version of hostility or some version of being really oppositional and really confrontational or something. But I think the task for Buddhists certainly can be to advocate for the end of systems, institutions, and politicians who engage in some or all of the 10 unethical behaviors. And but such advocacy, I think, aims to create bridges, not to break bridges down. That because of its strong emphasis on creating concord and unity and healing divides, is there a way of advocating strongly and powerfully in a way that doesn't perpetuate divides? How do we step in and create bridges for the common good? Can we try to bring people together to work together for the common good, free of factionalism? So, as I said, doing such activism is neither easy nor fast. It requires strong confidence in the value of the kind of ethical behavior the Buddha emphasized, strong confidence in the value of staying free of hatred, greed, and delusion, free of strong confidence in avoiding violence, not just physical violence, but there's also kind of verbal violence and of different kinds, or verbal, strategies, political strategies that are imposing one's will onto others, which is kind of violent. It's an activism that aims to change the psychological foundation from which unethical behavior arises. And so, regardless of how idealistic this whole approach is working to establish generosity, love, and wisdom as the foundation for society, so that fear is no longer the foundation. So, I don't really answer the question I began with, but it's the, where's the line between stepping up into this public sphere, politics and society, and taking a stand, and where and how do we do it, and where's the line where we don't, when we get too political, and maybe one way to answer that question is maybe there's an alternative to protesting. Maybe protesting is too oppositional, but maybe there's another way that is not a protest, but maybe is more powerful. And maybe it's powerful acts of presence, powerful acts of showing up in such a way that an alternative is being shown that can't be ignored. Maybe rather than protests, there are demonstrations of love, demonstrations of kindness and support. It's being demonstrated in such a powerful way that it touches people's hearts and minds and changes people, so that they drop their hostility and forcefulness and division that exists. So we can look for the third option. We can look for how we can work together for the common good. Look for options that can work for everyone, not just one party or the other. So that was my attempt at this topic. I feel inadequate in this topic, and so I want to say that it still remains a reflection, finding our way with all this. And maybe some of you are also finding your way. And if you were looking towards Buddhism for leadership in this regard, or what would Buddhists do, certainly I've presented the Buddhist point of view in a very, hopefully a clear way, that we would, whatever we do, we would be ethical, and we would figure out ways to motivate others to be ethical as well. And you can't motivate people in a healthy way by threatening them or opposing them. So how do we do that? How do we become friends with people in such a way we touch their hearts and to change something? So this will be an ongoing question for me, an ongoing question for maybe some of you and for our society. And hopefully we will not only find our way with it, but I hope we make a difference for the world. So the world becomes a better place and a friendlier place for everyone concerned. May all beings become each other's friends. Thank you.